the next thing I'm going to do is share my screen. And if you can just bear with me for a minute, I'll get that up. And so what I always like to do when I start sharing my screen, if I can get a thumbs up from everybody, at least whoever happens to be at the top will let me know they see my PowerPoint for the Intercultural Pedagogy Grant. So thank you for the thumbs up. I have met with every single one of you, thankfully. I managed to get that done. It's always ambitious when I put that out there before the program, especially starting that in the summertime. But there are some of you who I met with back in May. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today, when we get to that kind of the actual introduction to IPG conversation, is going to be a little bit of repetition for those from that pre-program meeting that we all had. But it's going to be a good refresher. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail, but also for those people who it's been months, it'll be a much needed refresher before we get into a lot of the content. But we're going to start out with our intercultural activity at the beginning as well. So for those of you who haven't seen me in months and just out of pure habit and repetition, my name is Dr. Daniel Jones. I am a senior intercultural learning specialist with the Center for Intercultural Learning, Mentorship, and Assessment and Research, which is a mouthful, so you can just say SILMAR because it's way easier. And we're at Purdue. We all love acronyms, right? We wouldn't be here if we didn't. That's why we got into academia in the first place, the acronyms. Okay, so let's dive in. Before we get into IPG, some announcements. I want to share some information with you all. These are programs that are being offered by SILMAR beginning this fall. The first one is the Seed Grant Program. We offer a grant for $5,000 for people who are doing work and research in intercultural learning tied to whatever particular discipline or field that you're working in, but doing intercultural work. We want to promote that and support that. So we developed a grant to help pay for some of those projects. This is being run by my colleague, Aprajita Jaiswal. Her email is down at the bottom. If you have questions, please reach out to her. So this is a call for people who are interested in applying to this grant program. And I'll take this opportunity to also say all of the PowerPoints for today and all future workshops, after I host the workshops, I will be posting them up in Brightspace in that, I think it'll be in the post workshop module, the reflect submodule that's in there. So that will be in every single module. You will be able to find the PowerPoints from the workshop there. I do it after I host just because I'm one of those people that sometimes I have to edit right up to the last minute. So I don't want to post something and then edit it and not get that to you. So I wait till after I host to post the PowerPoints. Likewise, this recording I will also make available in Brightspace for, just as I mentioned, those people who need a fallback to the fallback plan. And if you have something come up and you can't attend either one, or you get sick or there's an emergency, we do have this as a fallback. But please do reach out and talk to me if that occurrence does come up. I am sharing now. Is anyone not seeing the PowerPoint slides? You can turn on your microphone and just yell at me if you're not, or
I'm not seeing it.
You're not seeing it?
No.
Let's see who else is up at the top. Kat, are you seeing the PowerPoint slide? You are seeing it. Okay.
Okay, I found it.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And Bill, you might be having the same problem that I frequently have. I have 3 screens in front of me, and I have a lot of things open, and if I don't organize things, they get hidden behind things. So that happens to me a lot as well. Okay, so that's the Seed Grant Program. I encourage you to check that out. But like I said, the slides will be up there. So if you don't want to have to write down stuff right now, you can go and get to that. The nice thing about having the slides, it is a hyperlink, so you can just click on it and go from there. So that information will be up in Brightspace soon. The next program is Worldview Workshops. This is to help you work on your own intercultural development. And the idea is through that, you'll be able to then facilitate more with your students, just kind of like what we do here in IPG, but much more targeted and focused specifically on these learning outcomes. So we have cultural self-awareness, communication, empathy. And then finally, at the end, there's I think it's a series of modules for bridging difference. This is run by one of our fellows who's actually in the School of Languages and Cultures. Brett is very familiar with Tatiana. Tatiana Babch-Williams is one of our fellows here at SOMAR. And so she's running the Worldview Workshops program for us. Her information, as well as the events calendar that we have to register for the workshops. That link is there as well. So if you're interested, the first one is coming up real soon, is October 5th. So please check that out. And then finally, Pickle Cop. This is also run by Tatiana. Again, we have an events calendar up. The first one is going to be October 4th, 2:30. And this is, I'm sorry, I can't do it. It just violates every fiber of my being, having been at Purdue for so long. It's in the recitation building. I can't say Schleman. It's not Schleman. It's in recitation. It's in stone. It's right there. Okay. So anyway, the new Schleman. But there's also dates over here to the right as well. This is our community of practice. This is an opportunity to find out about research in the area. It's also an opportunity to, especially in this one, they're going to be demoing an activity. So adding to your toolkit, finding out what's, state of the art or what's going on in the field, and just to stay connected. So even after you have completed IPG, every year we'll have Pickle Cop meetings, and you're welcome. And I encourage you to take part in that and kind of stay connected to intercultural learning. So again, the events calendar would be the way to sign up for those events as well. So now we come to our actual workshop today, the expectations. If you're able to, try to arrive a little bit early. Again, Zoom can unexpectedly try to install an update on you while you're trying to log in. Sometimes we have audio glitches getting things to work. So if you can, if you're able to, log in early would be appreciated. I will try to do the same, although I'll admit to that being difficult for me sometimes as well. I encourage you, if you choose to rename your video. I see some of you already have that default setting. I need to get in and do mine. I've just been kind of busy lately, but if you want to add your pronouns as well. We're going to be talking about this fishbowl technique here in a minute. But as I said, if for some reason you do not want to be recorded, and I will be recording all the workshops, I understand if you want to turn your video off. But otherwise, unless we're doing the fishbowl, which will make sense soon, I encourage you to keep your videos on. That's kind of our way of knowing that we're engaging. This is what we do with our students as well. It's one thing to log in and attend. It's another thing to be engaging as well. And the video is one way to show that. Workshop will be 90 minutes. And just our general kind of etiquette protocol is, unless you're actively, asking a question or answering or speaking, please have your mic muted, just so that we don't have background noise, feedback loops, all of those other things that can be distracting for everyone as well. Invitations and permissions. So this has to do with the how, when it comes to engagement, of what are further expectations, but framing them as invitations and permissions. So invitation to hear and be heard. We like this phrase, the brave space, as opposed to safe space, especially when we're doing intercultural work, because these are difficult topics to discuss at times, and we want you to be brave and feel that you're safe, but feel the courage to share some of your ideas. And this is not always just when it comes to touchy subjects that are a little uncomfortable, but also just the fact that we're going to be talking about things that we often take for granted and don't need to put into words. So being brave to, and this comes up here in a minute, say things that are maybe difficult to verbalize. So please do have some courage, be brave, and share your thoughts. They are valued here. An invitation to speak to each other, not just to me. I think there's a couple of you who are already comfortable with that. So I do want to encourage everyone else, please don't feel like you have to go through me to ask a question directly of one of your peers here. As I mentioned in our meetings pre-program, I am trying to foster a cohort where I want you all to feel like you're in this together, working together and sharing ideas with one another. I'm just here to facilitate that. Invitation not to freeze yourself and others in time. And really what this is kind of let yourself off the hook. as I mentioned, things that we're going to talk about may be difficult at times, and you might say something ineloquently or maybe even mildly offensively, and you maybe don't intend that. But maybe after the fact you realize, oh, maybe I should have said that differently. Don't freeze yourself there. Just if you can, try to let it go and move on. And likewise, we should do the same for each other. Recognize that sometimes these are difficult things to put into words, and we're going to mess up sometimes. And let's not, base our whole opinion about someone on one moment. Let's have a collection of moments, help us develop a picture about the people that we're engaging with. That's also something we want our students to practice as well. Don't come in with preconceived notions, but allow the collection of experiences to inform you about the people you're interacting with. And permission to say it ugly kind of goes with what I've been talking about. Because these things are difficult, because we're going to be expressing things that we often don't verbalize, finding the right words may be difficult. Sometimes we don't always have to be eloquent. So you have the permission to say it ugly. And I like this phrase because it's nice and short. So even if you want to preface something where you're like, I'm really struggling how to say this, you can start with, okay, I'm going to say this ugly, and then give it your best shot. And then we all know what you're trying to tell us. And then the permission to mess up technology, especially me. It's going to happen. I'm going to mess up technology. I hosted this workshop yesterday, and guess what? I messed up technology. It's going to happen more frequently than I like, but it's part of the world we're living in now. We're going to mess up technology. So let's give each other the permission to do that, and we'll recover. And finally, this is an invitation to all of you. Is there anything that we're missing that anybody would like to see us add to our rules of engagement that isn't covered? And I'll also offer, you don't have to be on the spot with this. If it comes to you later, you can share then as well. Okay, I'm going to also mention that I will try to do my best to keep one eye on the chat. So if there's a time during the workshop where you want to share something, but maybe you don't want to interrupt people speaking, or you just want to be a little bit more low key with sharing and you want to do that through the chat, I'll do my best to stay on that. And if I do miss something and one of you all see it and you're like, this is really important, you can check out the chat. Somebody said something really interesting. And likewise, I'm not easily offended as far as if you want to interrupt me. I invite you to do that too. If you have something you want to share and I'm rambling on, as I sometimes tend to do, please interrupt me. Okay. So our learning outcomes for today have to do with the activity. So we're going to have some experience with the cultural self-awareness activity, both as from our own development perspective of being a learner about cultural self-awareness. But then number two, we're also going to be, I'm sorry, I got this backwards. We're going to be looking at the experience of this activity from a perspective of a program leader. So getting an experience with an activity that we could potentially use with our students. And then number two, thinking about developing our own cultural self-awareness. Number three, we're going to hopefully have a better understanding of the formal training portion of IPG. I'm going to go over not just the repetition of the stuff I've already explained in our pre-program meetings, but also thinking about kind of the order of things of how we're working through the program as well, which is somewhat a repetition, but maybe a little bit more detail this time. And then we'll have a little bit of time. If we do have time at the end, hopefully we'll get to some of the program logistics things. And this is really just me trying to bring to your attention, hopefully things you've already been considering and discussing with the Office of Study Abroad if you're doing an in-person study abroad program. But if not, hopefully I'm bringing those things to your attention. If we have time to discuss them, we'll get to do that as well. So stuff beyond the intercultural components. And at this point, I also want to mention, because we have a diverse group, mostly people who are leading in-person study abroad, but we do have some people who are planning on embedding intercultural competence in their on-campus courses. We also have people who are thinking about doing virtual exchanges. And we also have people who are just wanting to, will be on occasion doing distance learning or remote instruction. I'm trying to pepper in where I can, where it makes sense, some best practices, but also resources for the virtual environment. So this is one of the advantages to hosting the workshop through Zoom, is we can have some experience with that as well and add that to your toolkit too. So just as with a lot of things, providing more resources can often be helpful in areas, unexpected areas along the way. So hopefully that will benefit you as you go through this training. So the specific agenda for today, we're going to talk a little bit about video setup, and that'll make more sense here in a minute. And then we'll get to the ICL activity. After that, program overview, and then student program logistics. And then finally, a wrap up and talk about what's next. Any questions before we get started? Okay. No news is good news. We'll move on. So first, let's talk a little bit about video setup. So pretty much everyone here, I can see video, so we're doing good so far. But there's a little bit more to video setup. If we're intentional about it, we can actually impact the horrible aspect of virtual meetings, which is, I'm sure by now everyone has heard of Zoom fatigue. It's a very real phenomenon. It impacts us physically. It causes exhaustion. If any of you have had this experience where you've taught a class online and then had even just 2 or 3 other meetings that have been online during the day, but certainly some of us have also had the wonderful experience of having back-to-back meetings that have lasted nearly all day online. At the end of it, you are physically exhausted, and you might even need to take some personal time, before it hits 5 o'clock. We're just like, I made it to 3 and that's it. I'm done. Yesterday was one of those days for me. I got out of the workshop. I had one additional meeting, and as soon as that was over, picked up my daughter from school and I was out. And it was like, wake me up for dinner. So it is a real thing, but there are ways to not eliminate it, but maybe reduce its effects a little bit. And video setup is one of the ways we do that. So part of the reason we experience fatigue when we have these meetings is our brains trying to adjust to the visual input that we're getting, which is not natural, which is not 3D and in person. So any way that we can make the visual components more uniform, that will relax our brains a little bit. So if I have multiple boxes of videos on my screen, as we often do in these meetings, if my eye movement is going from one box to the next, and each of those boxes is relatively similar in 2 specific aspects, my brain doesn't have to do as much adjustment from one box to the next, and therefore not as much exertion, not as much exhaustion. So we look at lighting and framing. So if we can all just take a minute if we are physically able to, adjust our proximity to the camera, our positioning, if we can try to have a uniform appearance. And typically what I would recommend, you want to have a little bit of space above your head, because that feels natural. It doesn't feel like you're running off the edge. And also you don't want to be way down here where you're only seeing part of that person. And again, as I was saying, if you can kind of compare your visual that you're presenting in your video to the other people who you're also presenting next to, relatively how much you're filling that square, visually how much space you're taking up. So if you're really far away, you're a lot smaller. And if you're really close up, you're filling way too much. So this is part of it. Now, having said all of this, there's a lot of different ways you can adjust your framing, but that's not always possible. So I do want to give you all that out. If it's not physically possible for you to adjust some of these things, that's okay. We're just aiming for the best we can do, and that's good enough. And every little bit helps is my particular view on this. So if you're able to have a similar image to what I'm portraying, great. If not, that's okay. Lighting, the best recommendation for lighting in a video is that it not be directly center in front of you, but slightly off to the side and maybe up a little bit. So for me, I'm positioned directly across from a window, and that's the other thing. Natural lighting is the best light to have. It, again, visually feels more natural to the person looking at you, even though it's coming through a digital screen. the way you are lit up does matter. So I'm facing the window, and I try to, when I'm at home, for example, I have the window just off to the side for me a little bit. I don't have as much almost because I have a giant window in my office here, so I don't have as much control over that, but I do try to position myself over. Again, I want to acknowledge not everyone has control over this. Some of us are in offices that have no windows. I want to acknowledge that. Some of us are in a position where the way we're sitting, the place where our desk is, the window is behind us, and that's just the way it is. This is only in a situation where I have control over this. I can make these changes, and it may be something, just think about it for the next meeting, and that's fine too. So again, the entire idea behind this is if we can have some visual consistency from one window to the next in those little views when we're having those meetings, it makes our brains have to do a little bit less work and makes surviving through the length of a video a little bit easier. Finally, video etiquette. So if you need to mute your video for a number of reasons, you got to blow your nose, or, the animal comes in and you've got to deal with that. There might be different reasons that you might need to turn off the video, but I do ask, generally you do have it on. That way I know that I'm engaging. I can also read your expressions if I'm starting to bore you too. That's helpful to me as well. But as I mentioned earlier, if we're not taking a turn to speak deliberately, we otherwise have our audio muted so that we're not having background noise and stuff like that, distracting for others. The final thing I would say is the same thing I say to students. A lot of times my students are on study abroad, so I'm interacting with them from another country. So it's very tempting for them to want to go out to a cafe and enjoy that atmosphere in whatever country they're in. But I often mention to them, please try to attend the meeting in a location that is not visually distracting for everyone else. This is also why I use the blur function as well. But again, you're not required to do that. Some of you may not have control over that, or it may be too difficult. That's okay. We're just shooting for the best we can do. So let me get to this fishbowl thing. Maybe some of you have heard of the fishbowl technique, maybe not, but we're going to try this out in a minute. Basically what the fishbowl is because we often are in these meetings, and certainly with IPG having somewhere around 20 of these little videos, that's another way that our brain gets taxed when we're having large conversations. Now, I do want to acknowledge we're minimized a little bit more with me sharing my video. So some of you may only see a handful of those. But when we get to a part where I'm not sharing my video and you have the gallery view and can see everybody, trying to be, even if you're not trying to be attentive to everyone, it's still impacting your concentration. So the fishbowl technique came about if you're having a specific conversation, and we're going to do this with our activity, you can limit the number of people that are participating in that conversation. And so that's where the name fishbowl comes from. The people who have their video on and are participating in the conversation, they're in the fishbowl, and everyone else attending the meeting has their video turned off and they're outside the fishbowl observing. It's not a complete cutoff. So if you're outside the fishbowl, you can still use chat or interrupt real briefly to add to the conversation, but otherwise you're observing. And observing just a handful of people is visually less taxing than trying to have 20 people on the screen at the same time. So the way we're going to do this is, first we need to change some settings. So I'm going to stop sharing for here for just a minute. And if you've never done this before, it may take a minute to find this. So you should have in the bottom left corner control for your mic and a control for your video. Each one of those has a drop down or pop up window, whatever the orientation is. If you click on that arrow for the video, you should have a pop-up that has video settings down at the bottom. So I want everyone to click on video settings, and that will give you a pop-up window. And if you scroll down in that list underneath your video in the pop-up, you'll see a list of check boxes there. And one of them is hide non-video participants. And if it's not already checked, go ahead and check that box. So we want to hide non-video participants. Okay, and once you have that checked, you can go ahead and close that pop-up window. And I'm just going to pick 3 people at random who are at the top of my screen. So I'm going to pick Matt and Rachel and Karen. If you all can leave your videos on, do nothing. And everyone else, go ahead and turn your video off.
I'm not finding that button.
Well, it should be in your control bar down. Mine's down at the bottom. Sometimes it's up at the top of the screen. And it should be mute button, stop video, security, participants. But Bill, I'll give you time to look for that. I'm on for this. Having 6 people on the screen works just as well for my example. So this is a fishbowl. If we've got everything set the way we need it, what you all are seeing should just be 6 individual boxes, just a small group of people. And that would allow the 6 of us to have a small group conversation, and everyone else can observe and listen in. And it's a lot less taxing to watch this many people have a conversation. And we're going to get to practice this in a minute. So those of you who have your videos off, you're outside the fishbowl. And the whole hide non-video participants means you don't have 20 or 15 little boxes that are blank with names on them. All those boxes should have disappeared, and you only see the ones that have video on. So hopefully that's working. So you can go, everyone else can turn your video back on, and we're going to get ready for this activity, and we'll get to practice this right after. Okay, so let me get back to sharing my screen here. Okay, can I get a thumbs up again if we're seeing the slide, ICL activity 1? Okay, great. So if you don't already have it out, whether it's digital or printed out, please go ahead and retrieve the Voices from the Past activity that you all prepared from the Brightspace Meet module. I'm going to start out by giving you the context for this. The purpose of this activity is cultural self-awareness. So this is the row from the AAC&U Intercultural Knowledge and Competence Value rubric. So there's 6 competencies. So this is just the one row for cultural self-awareness that I've extracted from that rubric, so we can get a little closer look at it. For this rubric, they have written it actually right to left instead of left to right. So I want everyone to be aware of that. The lowest proficiency benchmark is to the far right, and the highest proficiency level capstone is right next to the name of the proficiency. And I think that's the reason they've oriented it this way, to have the highest level right next to the name of the proficiency. And that highest level, the capstone level, has all of the information possible for that particular competency. So cultural self-awareness at the capstone level is the ability to articulate insights into one's own cultural rules and biases. And specifically, that includes seeking complexity in cultural rules and biases, but also cultural identity, awareness of how our own experiences shape these rules, and how to recognize and respond to cultural biases, our own and others, and resulting in a shift in self-description. And to explain that a little further, that ability to shift self-description comes from kind of taking an outside objective view of ourselves, but also recognizing that we may be our cultural self may be viewed from different perspectives. From people that are part of our culture might view us in a certain way that we're used to, but people from other cultures may view us culturally in very, very different ways. So that ability to shift self-description that is more complex, that recognizes a lot of different perspectives. So how we're being viewed by others can oftentimes be as important as how we see and understand ourselves. So it's an increasing awareness of who we are as cultural beings from a lot of different perspectives. So the competency level, the proficiency level, I should say, in this competence, from this description here, the capstone just varies in the extent to which we're understanding that. So benchmark level, showing a minimal awareness of this, that this thing exists, and having a minimal awareness of who we are culturally speaking. to identifying the rules and biases, and then recognizing new perspectives about those rules and biases. So that's the increasing level. And then finally, articulating insights about these rules and biases and different perspectives of those rules and biases. So that's what we're aiming for. We're hoping to move from the benchmark level up towards capstone through activities like Voices from the Past. So that's kind of setting the stage, the context for this activity. Now, I like to present the learning objective at the beginning of my lesson. And technically, we're in the middle of the lesson because you already started with the worksheet. But some instructors like to end with the learning outcome or right before the ending. So that's really a matter of preference in your own personal style of how to facilitate these kinds of activities. So we're going to go into small groups here in a minute. I'm going to open some breakout rooms. The first thing I want you all to do as soon as you get in the breakout room is nominate someone to be in the fishbowl, because we're going to come back after the breakout rooms and have a fishbowl session. So I want you all to nominate someone right off the bat. Pick who's going to be your representative to talk on behalf of your group. And then after you've identified who that victim is going to be, you will then share your own responses from your worksheet. Just go through the worksheet and say, for this, I said this, this, and this. Share your own idiom or phrase or influential saying that you have as well. And then after that, after everyone has had a chance to share, we also want to talk about these three things. What does the message from your influential person mean to you? So at first, you're just going to be sharing, this is the phrase, but then come back to that after everyone's shared and say, this is what my phrase means to me. And then talk about how it was formative to you. So what is it about that message, now that you've explained the meaning, that was formative for you? How did it change your path in your life? Or assist you in the decisions that you made? And then finally, we want to figure out, what are these pieces of information? What do they tell us about us culturally? What does it tell you about me culturally, but what does it tell us as a group about us culturally as a group going through this program together? As with any of these intercultural activities, we're going to be starting every workshop with one of these. I'll have these questions to discuss. I post them up in the Brightspace module about the workshop, so they're there as well. The reason I mention that is because as soon as I send you into the breakout rooms, you're not going to have access to my slide anymore. You're welcome to take a screen grab or take your camera out, your phone out, and snap a picture real quick, but you can also just pull it up in Brightspace and have it there as well. So when I send you all into breakout rooms, you'll have about 10 or 15 minutes to discuss, and I will give everyone the 1 minute warning. When I go to close, it will give you a countdown for 1 minute. And let's see, there are 17 of us, well, not including the 16. So let's have 6 rooms, and we'll have some groups that are pairs, some that will be threes, which I think is a pretty good amount. So about 10 minutes, let's see, it's 20 till. So I'll call you all back at about 10 till, and we'll go from there. So you should see this pop up on your screen. Just click the join button, and that should take you into your breakout rooms. Mention the gallery view. Record button again. And before we go on, while I was in this break, while you all were having conversations, I remembered there were a couple things I forgot to mention. For the fishbowl setting, just on the off chance that some of you all were like, this isn't quite what he's describing, isn't what I'm seeing. The other thing I forgot to mention is the view setting is gallery view. So if you go to the top right corner in Zoom, you should have a view button, and if you click on that, you can have a speaker view, an immersive view, or a gallery view. So when we do the fishbowl, in addition to having the non-video participants hidden, you also need to have the gallery view selected. So I failed to mention that. The other thing I failed to mention is I said you could rename your little name at the bottom of your screen, but I didn't tell you how. You can actually put your cursor over your name and right click on it, and that will give you a pop-up. And one of the options is rename, and then you can just type in and save. And that's how to change that if you wanted to do that. So I apologize for bringing that up and then not telling you how to do it. So hopefully it's fixed now. We're going to go into the fishbowl. So hopefully everyone selected a representative, and everyone else can turn their video off. And as we're doing that, I also failed to mention at the beginning of this, but this goes for this activity, which is less important or maybe relevant to, but certainly might come up in future activities. Anytime I ask you to share with one another information from an activity, information in general, I ask that you share what you are comfortable with. And I encourage you to take this approach with your students, because again, we may be talking about touchy subjects, and I don't want anyone to feel obligated to share something that maybe they're not quite comfortable sharing with the group. So only share what you feel comfortable sharing. The other thing that goes along with that I always share before starting the fishbowl is, as representatives of your group, we want to try and portray what was the overall kind of conversation about. You don't need to go into a lot of detail. And the reason I mention this is one of the things we need to be mindful of is reporting back and specifically telling someone else's story. We don't want to speak on behalf of other people and accidentally put words into their mouth or misrepresent their story. So paraphrasing, summarizing, or generalizing is a better approach. Or if you're really not sure, avoiding telling that story and rather just give your impression about the topic in general as others discussed it, what your reaction to that was. That I found it interesting. I found it different than what I'm used to some of the things that were discussed. So I do want us to be mindful of that when we're acting as a representative for our group, that we're not speaking for people, but rather sharing the general ideas and concepts. And part of being a representative is sharing your own experience, having had those discussions. So we're going to get to these questions. We won't let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of you may not respond to every single one of the 3 questions. Maybe you'll answer 2 or 1. That's really up to you. If you want to answer all 6, I welcome that as well. But we're just going to go through each of the questions and we'll kind of go around. And for this, because we are a small group, I'm not going to call on you. You can just turn on your mic and say, okay, I'm ready to share. And you can just respond as you would in a regular conversation, as much as we're able to do that in virtual space. So first of all, what does the message from your influential person mean to you? So first, tell us what that message was, and then what does it mean to you?
Oh, I'm sorry, did you say we can just jump in, or I'm sorry?
Start. Whoever would like to start, Brett.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm going to answer the question the way you're wanting to. You're kind of directing us to, but our conversation. One of the things that I took from it. So there were 3 things. I had said I had heard because I always wanted to be a fiction writer, and I was concerned with the editing process. There was a piece of advice that said, learn to kill your darlings. What it means is you can't become too attached to the things that you write. You have to view them with an objective eye, as though you're, not yourself, but some third party. Another person said, and this is a great one, and we didn't get a chance really to get the significance of that, but it was something about you should eat, and I'm going to misrepresent this, eat an elephant 1 bite at a time. And I think it had to do with, how to take on a big project. And then another one had to do with this is not the world, which was a wise piece of advice given to one of us when I think the theater sort of aspirations that he had were maybe not going the way that he wanted to. And it was this kind of advice to shift perspective. This is only one tiny part of the world. What I wanted to say about this is we jumped from that to maybe jumping ahead of our task and linking it to intercultural kind of experiences. And it was Phil had pointed out how like that this is not the world. Has connects, very broadly with kind of intercultural experiences in general, that, where we come from and these cultural matrices we're kind of born in keep us from realizing, okay, that our own particular aspirations, all our little cultural coordinates may not be the whole thing. He also pointed out, or we were also led to how the world of writing, the world of theater, literature in general, may be a really nice way of sort of stepping outside of your own world. Literature can sort of simulate this world outside of the one you're familiar with in a really cost-effective way. And that's kind of I think, what I took the heart of what we were talking about to be.
Great. Thank you, Brett, for sharing that. It was really great. Yeah. Would anybody else like to respond to what does the message mean to you?
I sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, Celia. And your name is really pretty, by the way. It's a great name. I was working with Mike, and for both Mike and myself, our quotes, our messages were very tied to who we culturally identified with. Mike identified, farm family, farm community, and his quote, from his dad, being a first-generation college student, first person you should make friends with is maintenance. And very reflective of, kind of the farming mentality and community, and every day is a work day. Everything you do is interdependent. So it just was very, again, reflective of his culture. And then for me, my culture I identify with is as a teacher and as an educator. And then mine was a quote from Martin Luther in the Protestant Reformation, and that I cannot and will not recant anything. And I think as educators, one of our main tasks is to, assist this next generation with the ability to reason and to rationalize and find those existing internal truths. And so I think, as educators, we also have to be very self-reflective and thus very confident in who we are. And I think that comes from intercultural learning. So I think once you know something, you cannot retract it. If that's, what we're trying to teach students to do, then it's what we as the educators have to do and model. So it was very, our quotes were very reflective of our cultural identity.
Thank you, Rachel. That was great. Yeah. And I'm familiar with the Luther quote in the original German, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be a nerd, but yeah, it's a great quote. Anyone else for this first question about specifically the message and what it means to you?
Yeah, I'll share. I think the one that came to mind for me that I shared was a Mexican proverb that said they tried to bury us, but they did not know we were seeds. And so for me in everything that I do, the message around resiliency and how to, how to move forward through times of difficulty is, I feel like, part and parcel for, the job and life. And it's, really around a lot of what we do. And it kind of resonated with the other quote that we talked about was really around sharing whatever God has given you with others and helping those who are in need. And so, really thinking about your strengths. And I think it kind of goes along with like the teacher, I think, right, Rachel, you were talking about how we should be modeling what, we want to see. And I think that kind of resonated with that as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Ophelia. Yes. So already we're starting to see connections from one group to the next. So that's what I'm hoping for. So anybody else? Okay, I want to go on to the next question is, how was it formative? But we can also talk about, what these things tell us about us culturally.
Yeah. Sorry, Kat. My group, for each of our quotes, it either confirmed our path forward, like supported us and helped us grow our identity in whatever direction we wanted, or it was someone saying you couldn't do something and then pushing against it and driving harder towards the thing that someone said you couldn't do. And the and another one was a reminder that, like, even though things could have up and downs, or you'll have good days or bad days, that there's always a line of steady, like it'll all be okay in the end. So they all supported us, even if it was a negative phrase that we pushed against.
Thank you, Renee. Yeah, that's a really great point. And that is kind of a very common thread with these sayings, that whether we get them as children from family members, they're oftentimes these messages of, you're going to be faced with challenges and you need to be resilient and push through and be true to your convictions. And that's a very common thread through these as well. So thank you for sharing that. Kat?
Yeah, we had a similar thread in our small group that I worked with Gabrielle and Caroline, and two of our quotes was about finding our paths and following our hearts, following our dreams. And then one of our quotes was about I'm paraphrasing here, so Caroline, forgive me. The idea that someone's small idea of a larger sort of take over the identity of one's culture, and so finding ways to acknowledge and see through the small moments that people find. So the stereotypes that we come across through different cultures, and breaking those down.
Great. Thanks, Kat. Appreciate that. Do we want to address how these different messages, some of the ones that have gotten mentioned, but also, even if you didn't mention yours specifically, what are we kind of getting from these culturally? What do they say about us culturally?
So in our group, we all had 3 different messages that we brought that all kind of had different meanings. But at the base, they all kind of had kind of wisdom provided about being aware of what you're doing. So I thought it was interesting that we all 3 came from different places, but then the message that we brought to the group, in a way, all had the same general message of just being aware. So like I said, I brought my message of be coachable and have a good attitude. So you have to be aware in the situation you're in if you want to like get something out of it and learn and grow. Another message was find what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And in a way that's also about just being aware of what you're doing each day. And that way you can kind of be fulfilled and be happy. And then our third message was heedless shrimp are carried by the waves. And so like if you're lacking care and awareness, you're just going to be kind of like carried away by whatever happens with you. And so I thought it was interesting that we're all from different cultures, but then at the base level, they're all just about being aware of what you're doing in day-to-day life.
Thank you, Matthew. That's really good. What I would point out is that oftentimes the sayings that we're giving that are most formative to us, and think about what that word means, forming who we are and who we're becoming, they're usually handed down. They're from some authority figure, someone we acknowledge internally on our own, that this is someone I should listen to. This is someone who has wisdom that I can learn and grow from, that has some knowledge that can help guide me. So we're making that decision internally, whether it's, subconsciously or not, and oftentimes they come from family members, but they might be actual real authority figures like philosophers and other great thinkers through time. But they can also be idioms and expressions. You know, I think everybody is fairly familiar with that. You know, find what you love to do, and you'll never work a day in your life. And that don't know the exact wording, but I've heard that phrase before, and it's fairly common. So that's more of a kind of, doesn't necessarily come from a specific person, and although it might have for the individual who shared that, but it can also be given to us culturally, that it comes through the broader cultural community. Oftentimes, and I would say the majority of the time, these phrases are really imparting an analogy or a metaphor or some form of kind of simplified coded message that is really communicating what our values and beliefs are culturally, what we value, right? Staying true to our convictions. So being people of honor and respect, and valuing truth and knowledge. So these are, if you really start to pull apart these sayings, they all share that that connection of, it's imparting values and beliefs, what we hold to be valuable, and how that informs how we want to live our lives. We don't always live up to our values, but they're there. They guide us, and they help us make decisions through our life. And so that's something we can take away from this culturally, is that what things in our culture are being emphasized. And that's what we see through these sayings and phrases that we're given, even as small children. The phrase that I have, that I usually share when I do this activity, is from my grandfather. Actually, it comes from my mother, but through my mother from my grandfather, which is, what's right is right even when no one's right, and what's wrong is wrong even when everyone's wrong. And that, I mean, that is a value expression of, do what's right, don't do what's wrong. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. So it really is communicating cultural values. So that's what we're hoping to get out of this activity. So I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. I want to invite everybody to turn your video back on. We're going to end the fishbowl session, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this debriefing method, which is having gone through, so kind of taking a step back from the program leader's perspective now for this activity. Having gone through the activity yourself, done the Voices from the Past worksheet, had a small group conversation, and then the fishbowl activity, what I often recommend that people do to facilitate further learning for students is have a debrief of the whole activity. So taking a step back, and this is one method for this. This is, and I should share my screen. I'm gesturing to something that only I can see right now. Let me get this back up on the screen real fast. I apologize. So permission to mess up technology, please. So this is a debriefing method from the Tyagi group. This is Dr. Savasalam Tyagarajan, and I'm terrible with his name, and I apologize. But he does go by Tyagi. That's kind of his shorthand for his name. He and his group develop a lot of different activities that are very useful interculturally, but he does a lot of these kind of leadership and group teamwork type stuff as well. And this particular debriefing method we found very useful, and we use it with a lot of our activities. So the first question, how do you feel? This is usually most difficult for students who aren't really comfortable with the group yet and aren't comfortable talking about their own feelings, especially our domestic students, are very American, Western centric culture. We don't talk about feelings. We have to actually ask them to talk about their feelings. But we want to know, how did this activity make you feel? Did it make you curious? Did it make you bored? Did it, I usually, when students don't respond, I ask them, were you hungry? Were you tired? What did you feel? Tell me anything. But hopefully eventually one student will start chiming in. And that's just, we want to get the difficult question out of the way first, and then move on to the easy ones. Tell me what happened. And this isn't a trick question. Tell me what you did. Well, first I filled out this worksheet. I answered these questions. Then we went into a small group and we had a conversation. And oftentimes through that process, they'll begin to add in some additional information. And through just verbalizing the experience, they're causing some reflection in themselves and to everyone else who's listening in. What did you learn and how does this relate to the real world? Often our greatest takeaways for learning, because this is where we can also bring it back to the learning outcome, cultural self-awareness. You know, that final question, what does these phrases tell us about us culturally? Hopefully we're getting to that self-awareness piece, because we are cultural beings. We're a member of a cultural group. And this phrase is something that is being passed through that specific cultural group to us. And we've decided that it's formative, it's important for us enough to make it a part of who we are. And that gets to that self-awareness piece. And then what next is also great to reflect further and think about, how can I take this information forward? So now that I know this about myself, that I highly value this thing, or the other people in the group have very similar values that I also value, but maybe I've never heard that expression before. Now I've learned a little bit more about myself, and how can I use that knowledge going forward? Now, hopefully in future workshops, we'll have a little more time to actually dive into and use this debriefing method. I do actually want to, when I can, give you all an opportunity to lead a debrief maybe. But it's really, we have time constraints here. I want to, note that it is 20 after already, and I've got a lot more stuff to get through here, so I do want to move on. So I apologize for not getting to spend more time on this. But again, if you have final thoughts or a question or anything as I'm scrolling on, you please ask. The last thing I want to ask about the activity before we go to the next thing is, these are more of, I'll leave you with these questions to ponder rather than discuss. So how could you use this activity with your students? What are some practical administrative considerations? So are you giving them the worksheet digitally? Are they filling it out digitally? Or are you printing it out and distributing it in a classroom? Are you using it as a 10-15 minute icebreaker? Or are you making it more of a, like we did, much longer conversation, which you can absolutely do? What are some challenges you might need to consider or prepare for? And how are you facilitating this conversation around cultural self-awareness? And the thing I want to leave you with about facilitating is, think of it as being a tour guide. You want your students to discover the information on their own. You're just kind of, this is the way we're going down this path. Tell me what you think about that path. You're facilitating in that sense of the word. So whether that's through completing the activity or through the debriefing conversation, how do you want them to get to the self-awareness piece from this activity? And is it more important to do that? I do see that some people need to go, and that's fine. Thank you all for letting me know. And we need to move on as well. So program overview. I'm just going to skim through this because none of this information really is new. The big things we're going to be looking at in all 6 workshops are the intercultural frameworks, the tools and resources that are out there for you to use. I'm adding to your toolkit to help you in facilitating intercultural learning in your programs. So that's going to be a lot of that. But also, when I can, imparting some of those best practices, both for virtual instruction and for in-person instruction and just intercultural learning in general. Again, even if you're not teaching in a virtual space, you may be supplementing some of your students' learning or delivery of that learning via Brightspace or other virtual methods as well to enhance your in-person program. So hopefully it will be useful that way. Some additional goals, we'll talk a little bit about partnering internationally, not just finding partners, but maintaining those relationships and working with people internationally. That's part of why I want you all to work on your own intercultural development, because it'll make those international partnerships a little bit easier to kind of support and maintain and nurture. And then for a lot of people, doing data analysis is kind of a strange foreign thing. If you're not a researcher, I certainly wasn't when I first started in this job. I had to learn how to do it. So hopefully we'll have some time to discuss that. And certainly at the end, the final workshop, we're going to spend a lot of time in that modular workshop to do that. And then how do I report on these findings? And I think some of you all raised that in your warm-up discussion board post. I don't know how to talk about this stuff, so that's going to be some of what we're going to be working on as well. Reminder about, you only have to attend one of each workshop, even though I offer it twice, but the dates are there. They're up on the website if you need to reference them. Also, I had some questions about where's the link? How do I get in? And I apologize if I wasn't clear on that, but those will also be in Brightspace. They should be in the Outlook invites I sent you as well. But if you lose that, if you declined it, but then realize, oh no, that's the one I actually need to go through, you can go log into Brightspace and find it there. So, and I apologize if I didn't make that clear earlier. This is the general pattern that we're going to go through. You'll go into Brightspace, you'll do the warm up, the reading section, the watch section, and then you'll get the meet section and prep the activity for that workshop, and then attend the workshop, and then you'll go back to the module. So after today, you need to go back to module 1 and respond in the reflect submodule for that post workshop discussion board reflection. And that's really, we'll almost always have the same questions. What were your takeaways and what questions do you still have? But there may be some other follow-up questions in there as well. And then finally, there is a resources section, and both with the resource section, and I also want to mention this about really anything that's in Brightspace that we're contributing to, those discussion boards. All of this is meant to be a resource. Well, so the analogy I use is it's like a dartboard, and you all are the dartboard, and I'm throwing as many darts as I can to see what sticks. Some of those things aren't going to stick for you. Some of them, they're not even going to be useful, and that's okay. I'm just putting as much out of there as I can. You get to pick and choose which things you want to pay attention to. The discussion board, I set up that space so you all would have the opportunity to engage with one another, but do not feel obligated to read everyone's individual post and respond to everybody. You don't have to do that. You're welcome to do that, but I don't want anyone to feel obligated. Like, oh, this is an overwhelming amount of reading. I don't have time to read everybody's posts. That's okay. The same with the resources that come at the very end of every module. Skim through them. If there's one that looks interesting to you, open it up and take a look. But if you are one of those people that really wants to see everything, it's all there. You have access to it. And the last thing I'll say about that, all of these resources, Brightspace, we're not tied to the fall semester. You'll still have access to Brightspace well beyond this program ending. So you can come back to it later and look at that stuff as well. Okay, completion deliverables, the assessments, almost everybody's doing the IDI or the asks. I have a couple people that are doing the bevy. I didn't get many requests for some of the other ones, but if at a later date you want to check out some of those, we can talk about that if we have stuff in my budget to purchase some of those or just provide them to you. For those of you who have already taken your assessment and you're ready to have your debrief, many of you have already reached out to me and we've set up those meetings. Do try to get those scheduled early because there are 36 of you now and only one of me. So I've got to fit everybody into my schedule. I am trying to get everyone done before workshop 3 or module 3. So by that time, you can at least go in and report. And when you report on your assessment tool test drive, you're just saying, I did this one and we did the debrief on this date, or it's scheduled for this date. That's all I need to know. And I can check that box for you. For the others, the tool review, go ahead and check out the toolbox in the Hubicle. There are different types of tools you can write a review about. This is visually what you're looking for. When you open it up, you want that faded review button because that means no one's posted anything to that tab yet, because I want everyone to review a tool that has not gotten a review yet. So the other thing about kind of an overview, especially in workshops 2, 3, and 4, we're going to be looking at these 3 parts of creating an action plan using backward design. So starting with the goals or outcomes, then looking at how we're going to measure those goals, what assessments that we're using. And then finally, once we figure that out, what's the activity or the intervention we're going to use to exercise that competency. Here to the right, these 7 key steps, just elaborate on those 3 parts a little bit more in detail, but it's basically the same thing. And again, for the action plan, there is a space to get the worksheet and fill it out and upload it at the end of module 4. That is just your draft. It's not your final draft for your pilot program. You and I will maybe have some back and forth feedback about your worksheet, so don't feel like it has to be perfect, but that's where that space will be in module 4. And then we have the doing the pilot where you've submitted an action plan and I've approved it. You got to have at least 1 learning outcome, at least 1 assessment, and at least 1 activity, but you're welcome to go beyond that if it makes sense for your context or what you want to do. Recruit at least 10 individuals. Remember, I'm not concerned with where these people come from. That's your choice. And then you'll host the activity, administer the assessment, and collect that assessment data so that you can do the final part, which is reporting in the intercultural program leader completion report. So once again, here's the general timeline for doing each of these things. Generally, the assessment test drive and tool review will be done during that workshop phase, and then the pilot data analysis and reporting after. So again, this is just the general outline. We're running out of time, so I don't have a lot of time to talk about logistics, but I think the ones that most of you all who are leading in-person programs have already considered are the specifics of being in that location, but also some budgetary concerns. The Office of Study Abroad is really great in supporting these as well. If you need to adjust or create or have a new rate request for new budget items, talk to them. They can help you walk through that. There are deadlines for that, though, and you should be aware of that. I'm, of course, addressing the cultural side, and you're addressing the academic side, and hopefully we'll be able to marry these two together in a way that makes sense and fits with your academic component. Some of the logistical considerations that go beyond this is not just your program design and the budgeting fee structure, but think about recruiting time frame. If the program that you're leading is tied to a course or not, are there options to give your students credit if it's a program that is co-curricular, and what your liabilities might be. And again, the Office of Study Abroad is really great at supporting that. Paula Memmer is a great resource if you reach out to her. So finally, I got a minute and a half left. really squeaking this in. So next steps after you leave today, remember to go back to Module 1 and respond to the post-workshop reflection. Do explore some of those resources there, but don't feel obligated to look at every single one. And again, if you do want to look at every single one, you've got plenty of time to do it. It's going to be there for a while. And do start working on the next module. The Workshop 2 is going to come up before you know it next week. Finally, a reminder about those announcements at the beginning: the SEED grant, Worldview workshops, Pickle Cop, our community of practice. And then the last thing, again, a reminder about if you've not scheduled your assessment test drive debrief with me, do that soon, because those are all next week is almost all completely full. And after that, I'm pretty open, but do try to get those in sooner rather than later so that we have plenty of time to schedule those. Any final questions or thoughts or items for discussion? Well, thank you all for your attention today, joining me and taking part in the activity and the fishbowl, and your patience with some of these things as well as we get started. I'm a little rusty at the workshop at one point, but I'll be much better next week. Thank you all for coming, and I'll see you all again next week.
Thanks, Dan.
I'll stick around for a couple minutes if anybody has any questions you want to ask me.
Thank you.
Actually, Dan, I have a quick question.
Sure.
Those IDI, the assessment report, did we get a copy? Because I'm not sure I got a copy.
Not yet. So the standard procedure for the IDI is I'm only allowed to give you your reports and your specific score once we've scheduled your debrief, because it has to be done during a debrief. I will give it to you probably about 3 to 4 days before we meet. So you'll have a chance to look at it before we meet.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I was thinking, did I forget to download it? Fine. I'll schedule a meeting. I took the assessment, but I'll schedule the meeting.
Great. Okay.
All right. Bye.
Hi, Ophelia.
Hi, I'm so sorry for coming in a little late. I just wanted to make sure there's just a few things I need to go through for the week. Is that still okay to complete it? Okay, that sounds great. I'm looking forward to our meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, if you do have questions anytime, shoot me an email. I'm pretty good at responding quickly, unless I'm in the middle of starting the meeting. So I apologize for missing your message. But yeah, you've got time to complete stuff, and I was just discussing this with someone the other day. If you're not quite sure, did I do everything? Brightspace can be a little confusing because it gives you these little percentage. This is how much you've completed, 80%. Ignore the percentage thing because it doesn't really mean anything. What I would recommend is go to the grades tab, and you'll see a list of all the tasks that you need to submit something for. And that's where you can see if there's anything you might have missed.
I appreciate it. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
No problem. Have a great one. Bye.